Jamie Van Cuyk started her business, actually businesses, based on a desire to run her own thing. And now with growing your team, she has done that with the battle scars to show for it. Writing about entrepreneurs like Jamie is a Business Observer superpower. To read more about other leaders like Jamie, subscribe to the Business Observer. Go to businessobserverfl.com to sign up. Hello and welcome to the Business Observer's From the Corner Office podcast. I'm Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. Today's guest is Jamie Van Cuyk, president and founder of Growing Your Team. Jamie, welcome and thanks for being here.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome. We're going to get into growing your team. We're going to get into your career a little bit. Just real quick, you and I met because we're talking about something totally different. We have an issue in the Business Observer called diversions. The beginning of the year, we kind of get people out there, like, what are your goals? What are your resolutions? And we talk about the fun hobbies, pastimes, and passions. And tell our audience about what we wrote about with you, because I thought it was so cool and a really fun story. What's one of your passions?
Yeah, so I've been a dancer my entire life. And in my adult life, I've gotten into aerial dance. So if anyone's listening who doesn't know what aerial dance is, think of Cirque du Soleil. So the silks, the hoop, the trapeze. So it's a lot of fun. I started doing it right out of college, did it semi-professionally for a little bit, and then took a break with having kids and everything, and just recently got back into it the last few years. So it's a great form of exercise and a way to just be artistic and graceful and get out of the office a little bit each week.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. All right. And well, it's not really related, but we're going to get to know you just a little bit better before we get into some serious questions. Three rapid fire questions to get to know you. What are the two most used apps on your phone?
Oh, goodness. Probably right now, I would say my camera app would be one. I have two little kids, so, always taking pictures of them and everything. And then probably Instagram, when I just need to get away, just scrolling through reels and getting that little break in the day before I have to go back into real life or work or anything like that.
We all need those breaks for sure. I'm curious if your kids would be part of this answer. Maybe when you're at your best, Jamie, what's your best go-to morning routine?
I will say I am not really a morning person. So my morning thing is I need to be able to sleep in and wake up naturally. I don't want the kids waking me up. I don't want alarms waking me up. Like, that really puts me at my best, is being able to wake up when my body wants to wake up. And then lately I have been trying to have slower mornings. I've been the person for years that as soon as my feet hit the ground, I am off doing stuff, whether it's cleaning the house, getting things done, getting the kids ready, jumping into work right away. And so lately I've just been trying to take time for me in the morning, whether that is just lay in bed for a little bit and read, or get up and have that cup of tea or something slowly around the house. My kids are at the age now where they need more kind of like the direction and reminder to get ready, without me having to do everything for them. So it's just like, I don't have to be doing something the moment I wake up. So just trying to take that first hour to just slowly focus on me and getting ready and things like that, instead of jumping into getting things checked off the to-do list.
Yeah, it's definitely important to have that me time, right? And just focus, as you just said, get ready for the day. All right, last rapid fire question. What has been the longest plane ride you've ever been on?
That's a really good question. So I've been to places in Europe, but flying over from from New York, flying out there, I think it's about a 7-8 hour plane ride. So that's probably it. But then I've also flown from Florida out to, California and stuff like that, into Oregon. And I think that's almost just as long of a plane ride as it is out to Europe. So I don't know, I'd have to go down and break down exact hours, but it's either from Florida to Oregon or from New York to over to Europe.
Yeah. All right. So about 8 hours. All right, good. Okay. We're going to get into it. Jamie, tell us a little bit about, before we get into growing your team and what your mission has been there, because I know you had a sort of corporate America career before that. Tell us about you and kind of your career arc.
Yeah. So, okay, my career arc. I always think people always ask this question of like how I got into growing your team and everything. So, I started off in corporate America. I was working for the main company I worked for throughout my career was an international marketing company based in St. Petersburg. And I was in internal operations. So, I was an account manager for a while, then went up into leadership and everything there. I knew I always wanted to run my own business. So my goal when I was working in corporate was learn as much as I can about being a leader and about business operations and everything. So when I go to start my own business, I at least know some stuff. And so that was my goal. And I loved the company I worked for. I loved my job. I loved my team. And I just took that opportunity to learn a lot. One of the things that I didn't really reflect on how much I learned until after I left that corporate job was hiring. I hired a lot when I was in corporate America because my team was always getting poached to go elsewhere within the organization. So I had a lot of that positive turnover. So I had very few team members throughout my management tenure that actually left the organization, but I was always hiring because my team members were always being promoted or moving on to other things. And my peer managers were experiencing a lot of the same thing. So I would hire for them as well. I would work closely with the HR team with hiring. But to me, it was always just something that was a responsibility for my job that I just did. But I left my corporate job in 2016. So we're coming up on almost 9 years now when I left. And I originally left to start a software development company with my husband of the time. And I randomly one day I decided, I was like, all right, I couldn't find a daycare for my youngest daughter. My mom had been watching her when I returned back from maternity leave, and I couldn't find a daycare that I trusted. And a bad day at work just made me say, why am I trying to struggle to find a daycare? I'm just going to be a stay-at-home mom. I thought about that for 30 seconds and then said, I don't think I could ever be a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't match my personality. It's not me. It's not something that I ever wanted to do. So how can I be a working woman and make sure my daughter is taken care of properly? And that's when I was just like, we've always talked about starting this business. I'm going to run a business during nap time, on the weekends, in the evenings when my husband is home. I lasted about 6 months doing that and realized I hated the world of software development. I love tech. I love using it. I do not like being on that other side. So at that point in time, I had to sit back and say, what do I do? What do I do next? And going back to corporate was not the right answer for me because I knew if I went back, I would never leave. I would sit there and say, you tried starting a business once, your idea didn't work out, it wasn't what you wanted, don't take that risk again. So I was like, I need to take time to figure out, can I do a different business? Can I find what's right for me versus just going back to the safety net of corporate? And so it took a little bit from that point in time for me to really develop growing your team. I had done some consulting with the company that I left, and I realized through that I loved consulting. I loved helping people gain and understand their leadership skills and really learn new leadership skills and how to transition. Because one of the things I learned was people get promoted into leadership because they were good at their individual contributor job. It doesn't mean that they have or really understand leadership skills yet. And then they're thrown into these leadership positions and it's like, go and do. And they're like, wait, I didn't know what I don't know. And now I'm like, trying to figure it out. And people aren't necessarily jumping in to help them. So they're like, oh, you should be able to do this. So I was like, I want to help people really transition into being that great first time leader. So what does that look like? And with that, I had a membership to the St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce. And I was just like, I'm going to use this membership. I'm going to go to events and I'm just going to talk to people. I'm going to do market research to find out how can I take this love for consulting, this love for helping people gain their leadership skills and package it up into something people will buy. And at that point in time, I thought my target audience was going to be corporate organizations, really helping those first-time managers. And the more events I went through the chamber, I realized I wasn't talking to corporate people while I was there. I was always talking to small business owners. I was like, okay, like running a business and leading, it's different but the same, no matter like in different size companies. So I was like, I'll still do the market research with them. And that's when I learned that when I was talking to small business owners, that their number one issue, typically when it came to their teams, was hiring. And they would ask like, okay, well, you want to do leadership consulting, help us out. Can you answer some questions for me? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll answer some questions around hiring. And they're like, okay, great. Can you give me more? Can we hire you? Can you sign up for a consulting call? And at first I was like, no, my target audience is corporations, large corporations, not small businesses. I was like, but I will find you someone that can help you and support you. And I couldn't find the people to refer them to. That at that point in time, if someone said they were helping small businesses with hiring, they meant businesses with 50 plus employees, not 2 employees, not hiring their first employee, not 5 employees. And I was just like, wow, I can't find anyone to help these people. These people really need this help. Hiring is a leadership skill. Why am I not doing this? So it was from that growing your team was born.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. There's so many lessons there, right? There's the overused word pivot, that you're able to pivot a couple of times throughout this to find your niche. But I want to go back and ask you a question about, you talked about if you went back to corporate America, you would stay there. And I totally get what you're saying, because you'd, be doing well and you kind of be trapped in that, like, doing so well, couldn't leave. So what's your mindset like when you decide, hey, I'm going to do this? And as you said, you have a young family, so you have financial obligations. What's your mindset like, and how did you sort of convince yourself that you can do this?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. Like, before I really answer that, one of the things that came to mind when you're asking that question is, I had noticed when I was in corporate, like I said, I always wanted to start my own business. Every year we had to write goals for ourselves. In the first few years I was in corporate, my goal would always be my 10-year goal. I want to run my own business. I want to be CEO of my own business. And I had noticed that the last few years before I left, the verbiage of that goal was changing. It was like, run my own business or be CEO of someone else's business. Like, I knew I wanted to be ahead, but I was getting so comfortable in a job that I liked that I was actually noticing that I was pushing my goals aside for comfort. So when I realized this, it made me, when I was debating leaving my corporate job, I was like, I can't stay for comfort if what I really want is to leave. So how do I look at things? So I started creating a pro and cons list, and I did a lot of kind of, what's the pros of leaving? What's the pros of staying? What's the cons of leaving? What's the cons of staying? And at first, like, everything that was kind of on that side of I should stay in corporate, a lot of it was around finances. And I had to then really look at it and say, okay, if finances is my biggest worry, is it a true issue or is it a perceived issue? And so then I started going through things and started looking at, okay, how much money do I have in savings that I could help support the family? At that point in time, my then husband, he's a software developer that did a lot of contract jobs. For the first time since we had kids, he was working for a job where we could actually have benefits through his organization versus having benefits through mine. So it was like realizing, okay, we don't need to be on my benefits plan. We have another benefits plan. It was looking at, what do we actually spend a month versus what I think we're spending a month, and getting really clear on that budget. And we were very fortunate that, I would say, my equivalent to my paycheck was what we were putting into, I like to call, fun and future. So it was putting into a vacation account. It was putting into things like those big purchases. It was putting into retirement accounts and those things where it's like, we weren't living off of it day to day. So it was that realization that we could step back, and maybe for a few years, we're not putting as much money into retirement accounts. Maybe for a few years, instead of going on a big Disney cruise with the family, we're going to visit our family in another state where we can stay someplace for free. So I was realizing that we didn't need my paycheck to survive. And once I was able to really see that on paper, it made it clear that I can financially do this. We do have to change things, but it's not putting us in a thing where we're going to be depleting our savings in order for me to make this leap. So that was definitely one of the things that really helped. And with that, I could then also set certain goals. It was setting a goal of, in order to feel successful and feel comfortable, how long do I have until I need to be turning a profit in my business? And what does that profit look like? How much money do I need to be bringing into my family? And one of the things that we had decided, around that time was we wanted to send our kids to private school. So I said, okay, that's an additional expense we don't have right now. So what does that look like? And so my thing at first, it was like, I need to be turning a profit, and that profit needs to cover the tuition by the time our oldest is in kindergarten. So it was being able to set that financial goal. And that really helped me look at to say, I can do this. And I'm not hurting my family by doing it.
By doing it. So it's like, do the research. Don't just be overwhelmed and put off by the scariness of it, but do the research and figure it out and be analytical about it is what you did. That's great. All right, I want to move to growing your team, and one of the things that you talk about on your podcast and on in your literature on your company is processes. And I'm curious about a hiring process. And a quick story before I ask that question is, you mentioned, leaders just they're good at the thing and then they get promoted to the next thing. That was kind of me. I don't know how many years ago now when I was a writer and got promoted to be an editor. And then I hired my first person, and coincidentally or ironically, his name was Jay, and he lasted one day before he quit. So we jokingly refer to him as One Day Jay at the company now. And so I don't really know what my hiring process was. I liked him when I interviewed him. Obviously, we wouldn't have made an offer if we didn't. So that's all a preface to saying, help me hire better, Jamie. No, but what is a hiring process for a small business? When you say you help people with hiring process, what does that mean?
Yes. All right. So as I mentioned, part of the reason that I started this business was the realization that most small business owners were struggling with hiring. And through that, realizing that most small business owners never hired before doing it within their own business. Or if they did hire, they had the support of HR teams and senior leadership and everything that was really outlining the process for them, where all they had to go into was do an interview and make a decision, but everything else was done. And now they're here learning that there's so much of the hiring process that they didn't know was a part of the hiring process. So when we talk about the hiring process, there's a few things that go into it. So the first thing is being very clear on your idea candidate, who you're trying to hire. So this isn't just knowing I need someone to come in and do XYZ tasks, that this is their day-to-day responsibility. It's who makes up that idea candidate? What is the skill set that they should be coming in with? What is sometimes even the personality? And we don't want to say, okay, I need someone with a bubbly personality. It is, what does that really mean? Okay, friendly personality. Why does a friendly personality matter? Oh, they're interacting with our clients. They might be interacting with clients. For example, I have worked with certain law firms, and sometimes their clients and the type of law and stuff that they're working with, those clients are stressed out. They're working with clients sometimes and they're going through horrible situations, which means those clients are not at their best emotionally, and that those emotions might be put on that team member. Can a team member navigate clients that are stressed and be able to talk people down and be able to gather information when a client's in a high stress situation? So things like that is what does this actually mean in your business? What is your culture? What is your decision-making style and leadership style and everything? Because you're interacting with this person. So we need to look at this big picture. We also need to look at, what does success mean for this position? I work with very small businesses, and typically the positions we're filling for the very first time in that organization. So we need to know, what does success look like 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road for this position, so we know what we're aiming for. If we don't know who that idea candidate is and how they're going to impact our business, it's kind of like throwing a dart in the dark. Where's the dartboard? How do we know if we hit it? And things like that. So we need to know what we're aiming for, of who we want in our company, who that idea person is. And that's the first step of the hiring process, is really getting clear on who it is that you want to hire, who's going to be successful. The next step is creating the documents that are going to help you find this person. So first off is the job post. A lot of people think that they can just announce that they're hiring and they get a lot of really great candidates. Well, you might get a lot of candidates, but are they great candidates? We need to write a job post that specifically speaks to our idea candidate. We want a job post that turns some people away because they realize, they read that and say, this is not the right fit for me. I would be miserable in this job. And we want other people to read that job post and be nodding their head along and saying, oh my gosh, they just described me. This is my perfect job. I look at hiring a lot like marketing. And they say in marketing, if you market to everyone, you really market to no one. It's the same with a job post. If you write a job post for everyone, you're really writing that job post for no one. So you want a job post that speaks directly to that ideal candidate. So we use a lot of language like the ideal candidate is, and this position is for you if, and we use a lot of language like that to really describe who would be perfect for this role. The hiring process then involves reviewing resumes. We need to know what we're looking for on resumes. And I think this is one of the areas where people get stuck on looking for the wrong things. I always remind people, you're not hiring off of a resume, you're giving someone a conversation based off a resume. So we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for everything. I tell my clients we look for 3 things on a resume. What those 3 things are will differ based on every position, but we're looking for 3 things that we can easily tell on a resume to determine if this person is qualified for an interview. We don't read between the lines. We don't make up stories about a candidate and their experience. We're looking for 3 things. We then sometimes have fallback, what we call like nice to have things that we might be able to see on a resume. So if we go through and we're like, okay, now we have 50 candidates who have our 3 must-have criteria, we don't have time to interview 50 candidates. So how do we rank them? But we want to get into the habit of we're not hiring based off a resume. So what does it mean to be qualified for an interview? I also find that some of my clients, they'll select candidates to interview because the resume looks pretty, or there's things on that emotionally attract you to a candidate, but that candidate actually has no qualifications that match the ideal candidate. So we want to make sure that we're selecting the right people for an interview. And then with the interviews, I always say a minimum of 2 rounds of interviews. The first interview is typically a pretty short interview where we ask just some basic questions. Let's make sure they have the basic qualifications that we need. And then a second longer interview that you get into in depth with their experience. And every question needs to tie back to something about that ideal candidate. So we're not using generic interview forms here, interview questions. It's every question you ask ties back to something you need to know about that perfect candidate that you selected. When you go through that process, it is very easy to tell if someone is the right fit for your position. And then you can make that decision, bring someone on, and then of course, onboarding. Day 1 with onboarding is super important. So it could be for your case, that person came in and realized on day 1, the position that they were hired for was not what they thought it was going to be, or they came in and maybe, and this is no fault of your own, but came in and thought, this company doesn't really care about me. But sometimes businesses are so busy that they forget how important day 1 really is for a new hire.
Yeah, day 1 is so important. We had a guest on many episodes ago, Amanda Parrish, COO of an architecture firm, Folly Bryant in Lakewood Ranch, and day 1 is so important to her. Like, she goes all out and does all these things, right? Day 1 is so important. Okay, so that's a really deep process and a lot to do there. And you mentioned earlier you've learned some of these lessons in your past company as a leader, and you're obviously leading your own business now. As a leader, what stands out to you about good leadership characteristics? What do you look for in good leaders?
Yeah, so really good leaders. The number one I think that makes a really good leader is that people first mentality. If you're going to be a leader, there's people that you need to lead. So how do you treat the people around you? How do you get the best out of them? And one of the things that I mean by people first is understanding that everyone is different. So the way you communicate with one person might not necessarily be the most effective way to communicate with another. How do you interact? And the really best leaders are able to do that kind of individualized communication in a group setting where you're not necessarily, you know how to phrase what you need to say that impacts everyone in the room with only having to say it once. So that's sometimes like some of the best leaders there is how do we have that people first? How do we make it so the people that are doing the work actually feel valued? Because if they don't feel valued, they're not going to do a good job. They're going to be looking to do the bare minimum versus helping to achieve and exceed expectations.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so a kind of a leaders eat last mentality, right? Put your people first. I like it. What's a piece of leadership advice that you've received in your career that really stands out?
Oh, goodness. Okay. Ooh, that's a great question. I will say there's probably two things that come to mind for me. And the first one is, and this one comes to mind to me like right away, because I work in the hiring space. So hiring is on my mind all the time, and I'm sharing stories and examples with people. But when I was a very brand new manager, I was tasked with going to a job fair to meet candidates. And there was this gentleman that I met, and I just fell in love with his story. He was a first-generation college student. He worked full-time while going to college so he could reduce his student loans as much as possible. He had finally graduated. He was so excited because, like I said, he was the first person in his family to graduate college, and he wanted to find his first career job in his chosen career path. And I just loved his story when he was sharing with me all some of the personal details. So brought him in for an interview, interviewed him. And after the interview was over, we said goodbye to him. Myself and one of my peer managers got in the elevator to go back up to our desks. And she turned to me, she goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "I love him. I want to give him the job." And she turned to me and asked, "But can he do the job? And why do you think he can do the job?" And I sat there and I was just like, oh gosh, like I don't know. And she says, well, that's one of the things we have to learn when we're hiring is just because we're attached to a person's story doesn't mean they're right for the position. We need to make sure that they can actually do the job, or you're doing yourself and that person a disservice. So if you bring someone in that's not qualified, you have to spend a lot more time managing that person because they're always going to be struggling to keep up. And also, even if we say, well, I can do that, well, how is it for them to feel like they're always struggling to keep up? They're always struggling to be able to do the bare minimum because it's not the right position for them. So people want to do well. And if you put someone in a position where they're most likely going to fail, you're not doing them any favors. So I was then able to step back and say, okay, like, let's relook at this and let's make it so I can refer him to a job that he will actually be qualified for, instead of giving him, like, I can help him in other ways without adding him to my team because my team's not a good fit. So that was definitely the one thing that really stood out to me. The other thing was just communication, especially with remote team members. I was having a remote team member at one point in time, and she was struggling in some ways. And I would say the problem with this team member is she was in a position where if something was going wrong, it was her responsibility was to discover what was going wrong and report it out. Now, there were things that when it came to process and how they were performing the job, that there were some problems, but she was obviously in a position where we're talking about issues all the time. And all our conversations then revolved around issues and problems and ways that they were not performing as they should be with these issues and with these problems. And our conversations just got really negative in a way. But I wasn't noticing that. And we were in a meeting. It was myself, her, and my boss. And my boss asked a pointed question to her. It was like about how this team member and I were interacting. And this team member, I'm so thankful for her that she said she felt like we had a horrible relationship, that all our conversations were negative. And it was hard to hear, but I was so thankful that she said that because it made me realize, I was just like, she is right. All we're ever talking about is issues, whether it's the issues that she's discovering, the issues with her performance, the issues, it's all issues. And I was like, she's a remote team member. I'm not saying hello to her as we pass by the hallway, chatting about life, things like that. It's like, we're just getting right into the subject, the issues. And so I then realized, I was like, I need to do a better job building this relationship. I need to make sure that I am viewing her as a person on my team, not just someone that's causing me problems. And if I want her performance to improve, I need to encourage her to improve her performance and not just talk to her about how her performance isn't improving or isn't where I want it to be. And so it was really hard to hear, but it just made me realize that you need to put in more effort when you have remote employees to make sure you have that good relationship. And even if you have an employee that has performance issues, or for her case, is the person who notices all the issues that are going on, it's her responsibility to identify them, making sure problems aren't the only topic of your conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, over communication, certainly a big lesson. Wow, that's awesome that you were able also to, again, sort of get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? That you embrace that and took your ego out of it, and were like, okay, what can I do to make this better? And you learned from that. James, we're kind of getting to midpoint of 2025. What can we expect from growing your team the rest of the year? Last question, what's new and exciting happening this year for you guys at your organization?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that mostly we're just moving through, or we're really helping out. We help with a lot of hiring. We help write the hiring plans for businesses. We help do consulting. So if people don't know really what they don't know about hiring or need help here or there, we're always offering that help. I would say one of the things that is a little bit different that we are doing, we're developing and starting to implement for the rest of the year, is we do a lot of full service recruiting for small businesses. But small businesses, sometimes a full service recruiting package isn't necessarily the right fit, or it doesn't fit into their budget. So we're starting to develop some additional recruiting options for small businesses that just need a part of the recruiting process versus the whole recruiting process. And then we also work with some clients that are in that growth phase, that are bringing in a lot of new team members this year. So we're developing some bigger recruiting packages for if you're looking to bring in 4+ team members over the next year, ways to work together on those where it's not individual projects that we're working on. Is things that better fit budgets and timelines and everything. If you're looking to bring in, like I said, 4 or more people within a year time frame. So we're just looking to say, how can we do what we currently offer in ways that better fit our clients' circumstances?
Excellent. I love it. Jamie Van Cuyk of Growing Your Team. Thank you so much for joining us on the From the Corner Office podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Business Observer From the Corner Office podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gordon. This podcast was produced by Reed Corley of the Corley Company in Sarasota. To hear more episodes of From the Corner Office podcast, go to businessobserverfl.com.